Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The rain was drizzling, leaving long, dirty streaks on the car. The man behind the wheel glanced sideways at his fiancée, if he could call her like that. Honestly, she had referred to herself as such and now told everyone they would get married. Franco Arias himself didn't particularly believe it, but he didn't mind her chatter either. After all, it didn't mean he would have to marry her for sure just because she said it. Franco wasn't afraid of public judgment. To him, all her empty chatter was nothing more than girlish nonsense she entertained herself with because she didn't work. Angelina Grandes was surfing her phone, typing something quickly. Occasionally, she glanced at the road, as if trying to assess how many more hours they would have to spend on the road. Surely, Angelina was already arranging things with her friends, who were waiting for them near the lake. Franco didn't want to go there, but staying home with his father, who was dying before his eyes, was also difficult. The more his father succumbed to disease, the more he wanted his son to take on responsibilities. If for Pablo Arias, it was the perfect plan to continue the family business, for his son, it was just another attempt to burden a young man with a heap of responsibilities he didn't need at all. "Hey, maybe you'll talk to your dad after all?" Angelina asked, looking at her beloved and immediately smiling. Her smile was sickeningly sweet and predatory, and frankly, he never liked it. Every time Angelina smiled, the young man felt like an experimental rabbit about to be devoured by this creature. He knew Angelina was one of those who hunted men, looking for those with enough money. He tried to steer clear of all the sharp edges. At one point, he tried to break up with her, but it didn't go as planned. Franco fell in love, much to his regret, and now he tried to keep these relationships at arm's length. You're making yourself out to be a stage king for nothing. Sooner or later, you'll realize you can't do without money. You grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth, so you don't understand what a luxurious gift your father wants to give you by handing over the business, Angelina said, once again touching on a topic he didn't want to discuss. Franco believed that talking to his father was his personal affair. No pseudo-brides had the right to stick their noses in there. "If you grew up in poverty like I did, you wouldn't miss such a luxurious opportunity," she retorted. "Angelina, back off before I tell you to get lost. Seriously, I'm tired of your moralizing. You're just like my father, for God's sake," the man said indignantly, immediately brushing her off. He wanted her to back off, because arguing with her in the middle of the road and then being stuck with her at the lake was not the best idea. Angelina was one of those girls who could get everything they wanted from a guy if necessary. Why did he even get involved with her? Franco couldn't find an answer to that question. Finally, the dark bus turned left, transitioning from the smooth road to the bumpy track. Angelina grimaced, but she knew this road well and understood they wouldn't get anywhere without passing through this part of the road. When the car finally stopped, several cars were already parked by the lake. Horacio and Elisa's car was to the right, while the loving, happy couple, seemingly made for each other, were trying to set up a small campfire. Franco found Angelina's friends annoying. They even hinted they should have had a wedding, and it all seemed more like cheap matchmaking when nobody asked for permission. At the same time, they expected gratitude for putting pressure on their relationship. Franco stepped out of the car, immediately grabbed a bottle of alcohol from the trunk, took a few sips, and flopped into a folding chair, which seemed to be placed there specifically for him. Angelina looked at him disapprovingly, but he didn't care. Let her do what she wanted. He was tired of constant pressure at home. He was tired of listening to his father, and now he had to endure her scolding too. He could easily break up with her, go through it, and then find another girl, simpler and more modest. And without the idiotic fixation on getting married by a certain age. They were sitting at a large table, which swayed a little but still served its purpose. They caught some fish in the lake, grilled them, and now they were chatting about life's ups and downs. Franco hardly participated in the conversation, occasionally nodding and grunting agreement, but he wasn't about to open his soul to those who somehow thought they knew better how he should have lived. Late in the evening, when everyone dispersed to their tents, Franco was sitting by the lake. He was drinking, staring ahead, pondering how his life would turn out when his father passed away. Franco wasn't planning on taking over his father's business. He wanted to distribute the remaining money wisely, live for himself, and enjoy life without worrying about everything. But his father was serious about it. "Franco, why do you look so burdened?" "Maybe because my father is dying?" he retorted to his failed fiancée, who approached him from behind. Franco couldn't see her, but he knew Angelina was standing there with her arms crossed over her chest. It was her favorite pose, one she could maintain for hours while pouting like a child who didn't get a chocolate egg at the store. This is a great opportunity to take over his business. And finally, start earning money yourself. Angelina began to speak, but immediately jumped in place as he snapped at her instantly. "What's it to you? Why the hell are you meddling in my father's and my affairs? Can you finally shut up? You're so damn stupid, Angelina. It pisses me off," he yelled, paying no attention to the fact that people around him might hear him. Franco never cared about what others thought of him, ever. He respected himself for this straightforwardness, absolutely disregarding how other people would react to it. "Stop yelling at me. You'll kick yourself later and complain that you didn't listen to me, but it will be too late," Angelina said, discontented, crossing her arms over her chest. But this time, her face was filled with disappointment and dissatisfaction. "I couldn't care less. It's not your business anyway. Take care of the girl's stuff and stay out of my business. I'll solve the problem with my father and the money myself. Nobody asked you to do it, Angelina. Go to your tent, dream of our wedding, which apparently should happen without me altogether," he shouted. Franco stood up, grabbed a huge rock, and threw it into the water. Huge ripples spread in different directions, creating a whimsical pattern that spread across the water's surface. Angelina wrinkled her nose disapprovingly, then walked back to her tent, deciding not to exacerbate the already complicated relationship, which became increasingly difficult for her with each passing day. Franco had no intention of talking to her or involving her in his ideas about his father's money. And also, he was thinking about breaking up with Angelina. She would find a richer man and leave him alone. She would give birth, start a family, and try to squeeze the last money from a man who would succumb to her forced tenderness. Pablo Arias had no idea where his son had gone. He hadn't been particularly interested lately. Franco could disappear suddenly, leaving a mess behind in the apartment. Or worse, he could go somewhere with his girlfriend, leaving his mistress on the couch in the living room. Pablo had grown tired of trying to talk sense into his offspring, who became more unbearable with each passing year and more focused on money, which he didn't want to earn. The car stopped. Pablo locked the car, got out, and headed straight to the hospital building, where he wouldn't hear anything good. The man harbored no illusions about his health or his increasingly uncertain future. He was planning to hand over to his friend the restaurant he ran and his business in exchange for shares for his son under contract. All of it ceased to matter when he found himself in the doctor's office. Olivia Perez, a very stout woman with a red face, gestured for him to sit in a high chair. He sat down, as usual, placing his palms on his knees like a schoolboy who was about to take an exam, trying to attract as little attention as possible. She placed the test results right in front of him. Pablo didn't need to look at the papers because he saw the burdened face of the unhappy woman who was putting all her efforts into pulling him out of the abyss of illness, already realizing that it was impossible. "It's time to accept it. Nothing will help me," Pablo said. A sad smile lit up his face, eloquently indicating that he had finally given up. How could he not give up in a situation where attempts to escape the abyss ended in a nightmare? New medications brought side effects, endless tests had left no space on his skin untouched. And every time he came to the hospital, he already knew in advance that nothing would work out. He would have to spend his last days in hospice or next to someone who had no interest in him. His son had never asked him about his illness or about how they would handle finances after the man was gone. His son decided that Pablo would figure it out on his own, as he had no intention of participating in business processes. Olivia glanced at him once more, but she already understood that she wouldn't be able to explain or prove anything to him. It was pointless to talk to a man who had already given up. Maybe you should still go? It's a good doctor. They say he helps. I can't advise anything anymore. My knowledge is exhausted here, Olivia said. Olivia, if you couldn't help me, then certainly no doctors wouldn't be able to help together. Thank you for everything. But I'm ending this endless ordeal with treatment, he replied. He stood up, kissed her hand, and then left the office. Time passed, and his condition only worsened. Unpleasant symptoms appeared, making life increasingly difficult. With each passing day, simple everyday tasks became unbearable for him. Eventually, he wouldn't be able to care for himself, lose his self-respect on that account, and then find himself trapped without the ability to escape and continue as before. Pablo decided to go to work because staying at home made no sense. What would he do there? Watch the elderly housekeeper start telling her religious stories again. Or wait for his son to come home with another complaint, expressing dissatisfaction that his father wasn't spending enough money on his grown-up little boy. At work, at least he could engage in something enjoyable that would distract him from the succession of misfortunes in life. When Pablo pulled up to the office, he almost got out of the car with joy. He saw a large red Jeep with pristine white stripes. Such a car was only owned by one person in his memory. Basilio Hernandez was his childhood best friend. They studied together, grew up together, and even got married around the same time. But then their paths diverged, and their meetings became rarer. And since Basilio finally moved abroad to run his business there, they could only see each other talking on the phone and in person once a year if they were lucky. And now Basilio's car was parked near his office, gleaming. For a moment, Pablo even forgot about his ailment. He rushed into the office, where he saw the man he had missed. Basilio had gained a lot of weight and looked sad and awkward, but a happy smile wandered on his face after meeting a close friend. Basilio, I'm so happy to see you. You've become so chubby, Pablo exclaimed, jokingly patting his friend on the belly. They were both fairly plumpy men once, but now illness was eating Pablo from the inside, leaving him a translucent copy of himself. Soon they settled into the office. They brought some food, so they could spend time properly without being distracted by stomach growls. Pablo was watching his friend with pleasure, as he terribly missed him and passionately wanted to know that even after his death, everything would be fine for him. Basilio was aware of his friend's illness, but he pretended that nothing was happening because he knew it was the best option for him. Pablo enjoyed feeling like he wasn't ill. It was all temporary. Soon he would get a solution, and everything would be as it was before. But since their last meeting, Pablo had changed significantly. He had become emaciated, looking less and less like himself. This sight deeply saddened Basilio, who realized that he would soon lose him forever. Life has gone downhill. My beloved wife passed away, and the business is almost impossible to run. Even the restaurant I love so much is on the verge of closing. Just give people a reason, and they'll swoop in like vultures, tearing apart out of envy. I've lost all my former vigor, Pablo said. Come on, Pablo. Don't wind yourself up, Basilio waved dismissively, wanting to support him but finding his words inappropriate. My son doesn't want to take responsibility at all. I offered him, while I'm still alive, to take over the restaurant and learn to manage it. It's a great opportunity. I'd provide everything, and he would just have to run it. But he only spends time with girls at home and pretends that my business and making money are not his concerns. He's living carefree. Shame on me for raising such a person, Pablo said. I'll talk to your son. Maybe it's not as bad as you think. Just don't get too upset. Kids who grew up with a silver spoon in their mouths behave like this. He doesn't understand the value of money, and he won't until he experiences life himself. Come on, let's forget about it like a bad dream. Let's talk about something else. Whenever you start talking about your son, you're as white as a sheet, Basilio said. Pablo was relieved to change the subject of conversation, but he couldn't calm his thoughts, and from time to time, he He still pondered his son and how their relationship had turned into an endless nightmare because each insisted on their own and couldn't sway the other. Pablo was sure his son would squander all the money and become impoverished. Meanwhile, Franco believed that his father was overly dramatic. He shouldn't have cared what would happen to all that money after his death. When Pablo found himself alone, thinking about his son became even more burdensome. Doubts about his will swirled in his head. Maybe I shouldn't leave anything to my son at all? Let him struggle and try to earn something in life. Maybe he'd realize that his father was right all along. But as soon as he imagined leaving his son with nothing after all they'd been through, what was the point of him working so hard? Pablo heard the ringing of their small phone. He knew it was the secretary, but he didn't want to pick up the phone. However, the woman entered his office anyway. "Pablo, some girl wants to see you," she said, furrowing her brows and glancing back. The girl, not waiting for Pablo's response, peeked into his office. He immediately recognized Angelina, who was smiling at him as if he should have jumped for joy at her arrival. "Pablo, can I talk to you?" "We're practically family by now, if you haven't forgotten," Angelina said. But Pablo hadn't forgotten. He hadn't even tried to remember yet another girl his son was entertaining. He was telling her the fairy tale that they would get married, as he always did. Marriage meant nothing to Franco, and he could easily deceive anyone, telling stories to keep the girl around for as long as he needed her convenience. Angelina closed the door, entered the office, and smiled foolishly, but Pablo wasn't a fool. He also saw all his son observed, that she was a hunter. But unlike his offspring, he had no intention of manipulating this girl, even if she pretended to be a sweet little angel. "Listen, I've decided that we need to talk in private. Your son is going crazy, he's worried so much. He's constantly thinking about his biggest fear, that you won't be around," Angelina said, then sorrowfully lowered her head, but there was no sincerity in the gesture. "Angelina, let's skip all these fairy tales now, just say what you want." "I don't have much time to listen to all this," Pablo said. But she didn't even think of hurrying. "I know you want to pass the business on to him, and he's refusing. But I think he's just going through a phase. He's afraid of not living up to your expectations and not being able to handle it. Let's sign the restaurant over to my name or make me the manager, and you can leave everything else to your son. That way, you won't worry about your business, and I'll take the initiative," Angelina suggested. The audacity of this girl astonished him. But at least she was interested in the business, unlike his son, who showed his father only cold hostility. Angelina outlined how wonderfully the business would unfold if she took charge. She didn't demand a quick answer, but even in his worst nightmare, Pablo had no intention of handing over the business that he had been running his entire life to this shadowy girl. It was a perfect opportunity to talk to his son, to show him that this girl was framing him while he was waiting for the right moment to break up. Pablo was driving home. He was mulling over various thoughts, trying to focus on mundane things. He wished his son would finally understand him. Especially since he had spent so much time trying to reach out to him, it was all utterly futile. And now this girl showed up at his office. For some reason she thought she had some right to own the business or take responsibility for making decisions. Yet Angelina behaved as if nothing reprehensible had happened. She was just here to help. A saintly person who simply came to the rescue at the right moment. As Pablo pulled up to the house, he saw his son's car but didn't feel happy about it. He had stopped hoping that his child would understand and that they would ever have an honest conversation about business, finances, or anything else. Despite his age, Franco just wanted to have fun, drink, and sleep with girls, promising them to get married and then disappearing and having new romantic adventures. The young man didn't want to deal with the business, learn to take responsibility, or take on duties that could tarnish his beautiful image of life. "So, how are you doing?" Franco asked automatically when he saw his father enter the kitchen. There was a faint smell of alcohol. It was nothing major, just another attempt by his son to distract himself from serious matters. "Do you know that your Angelina came to my office today?" Pablo asked directly. He immediately saw that his son had no idea. Angelina had tried to deceive them both, but it didn't work out. Franco frowned, knowing that his father wouldn't give in to this girl and that she wouldn't be able to deceive him. Everything was under control, but it was worth noting that Angelina could easily turn against her beloved, whom she presented as her fiancé. She showed up at my office today and started claiming that we're practically family and that she wants to take over managing the restaurant. You need to be more careful with her. And learn to choose reliable people for life, Pablo said in a disapproving tone, disappointed once again in his son's choice. Franco wasn't exactly discerning, but he could not set up his father so blatantly, at least. You either talk to her yourself or, next time, I'll tell her to get lost. And then don't be surprised when she drives you crazy because of it. I understand everything, son. She's beautiful, like a model on a magazine cover. But beauty isn't everything in this life. Humanity, decency, kindness, and care should be a priority. And you chose some shadowy girl who wants to betray you to get rich. I'm not going to advise you on anything because I know perfectly well you won't even listen to me. But when I'm gone, son, she'll wrap you around her finger like a fool. Leave you penniless and then disappear with some wealthy guy. Pablo finished his tirade, feeling tired despite he didn't have any matters to solve today. It hurt him that his son offered so much to him. And that with each passing year, the differences between them became more significant. As Pablo left for his office, the young man couldn't calm down because he had wound himself up to the limit and decided, come what may, to find out why on earth his chosen one suddenly thought she had the right to come to his father's office, assert her authority there, or worse yet, hope for getting money that wasn't hers. By the time Franco pulled up to the house, he was so angry that he was ready to emotionally tear her apart. But as soon as he saw her tender face, all his anger gradually subsided. What the hell did you come to my father's for, making a scene there? Franco asked as she dragged him into the apartment. Angelina acted as usual. She pushed him onto the bed, and he forgot everything. And by the time it was necessary to continue the conversation, he couldn't be as aggressive as he was a few minutes ago. Why? Should I wait until you miss out on a great opportunity in life? She replied. It's none of your damn business. This is my father's business and mine. It isn't your concern. Franco shouted, feeling his anger rise again. His father was right. He needed to stay away from Angelina. The more he thought about it, the more eloquently she showed him how unreliable she was for long-term relationships. Your father doesn't understand that you're useless. No words can convince you to take on the family business. I can manage the restaurant. What's it to you? You're not going to do anything about it anyway, so give it to me. Or do you think if you don't get it, then no one should? She asked indignantly, sincerely not understanding why he was reacting this way. Franco just rolled his eyes. He was angry with her, but he tried to hold back his emotions. Arguing now would be out of place. Angelina would remain the only person he trusted after his father was gone. He shouldn't have trusted her, but he couldn't leave her either. Franco realized he was weak before her. And he also understood that the girl could leave him at any moment for more comfortable living conditions. You're just a fool. You're wasting a great opportunity. I would never do that. It's a shame that your father, without even giving me a chance to show myself, ran to tell you everything. I thought he was a businessman, and we could find common ground, she said in a businesslike tone. You're right. He's a businessman, but you're not. So don't blame my father. He did the right thing by not trusting you, the man replied. He enjoyed hitting her sore spot and watching her try to navigate the situation as gracefully as possible. He hugged her tenderly again, but Angelina pushed him away, not wanting to engage in a conversation that would have absolutely no result. Your father is seriously ill, he's dying, and everyone understands that. The head chef ran away, and fewer people came to the restaurant. Soon, there won't be anyone left there. The establishment is already running at a loss, and it's only going to get worse. We need to take the bull by the horns. Angelina said, visibly upset. It was clear from Angelina's face that she was upset. No matter how much Franco tried to cheer her up that evening, nothing worked. In the end, she just told him to go home, and he was left with nothing, immersed in thoughts of whether to end the relationship now or endure her as long as fate allowed. Angelina was saying the right things. Pablo was seriously ill, and the situation with the restaurant was getting worse every day. Even the head chef, who was deeply committed to the cause, left, deciding that there was nothing to catch here. Maybe I should have persuaded my father to make her the manager after all. Angelina intended to run this business, not just own the restaurant for the sake of a beautiful picture. Unlike her chosen one, she understood not only the value of money but also the value of opportunities, which rarely appeared in her life. Just a few days after that conversation, Franco saw his father's friend, Basilio. Basilio was a happy man, often excessively lively and cheerful. It was always pleasant to chat with him, but for some reason, Franco didn't want to do so now. He knew exactly what the conversation would be about. But he couldn't refuse to talk to a man who was like a beloved uncle to him. "Franco, it's a tough time for your father right now. There won't be another chance. We all pretend that nothing is happening for his sake, but that's not the case. You're a grown man, you should understand where all this is going," Basilio said. He wasn't joyful anymore. All the liveliness that was there before has now turned into nostalgia for the golden times. You need to get the wheels rolling. Right now, it may seem like nothing bad will happen. You'll live happily, enjoying your father's money. But are you sure that's how it will all turn out? There are competitors and crises. Anything can happen, and then you'll be left without money, along with a heap of problems, Basilio said. Franco rolled his eyes, already tired of hearing all this. But apparently, he had no choice. He looked at the man, who was trying to prove something to him, with a completely absent gaze. Well, what was Basilio's goal? Was he trying to make Franco change his mind? My father worked his whole life, so let his work not be in vain. I'll just live my life to the fullest on his money and won't spend my life on endless making a living, Franco said honestly, then smirked, noticing how his answer disappointed Basilio. The man had 2 sons who easily took over their father's business, approached it responsibly, and could manage everything without their father being present at the sites. Basilio hoped that the conversation would help him reach out to the carefree young man. But Franco wasn't just flighty, he was completely uninterested in continuing his father's business, to which he had dedicated so much time and effort. Your father loves you so much, forgives you everything, and you can't take his restaurant into your own hands? He's already left you without a business, just so you can receive interest. And instead of being at least a bit grateful, you're screwing him over, fully aware that he doesn't have long left. Basilio said with reproach in his voice. You know what? Leave me alone. I'll sort things out with my father myself. It seems like everyone in the world already knows how I should live, what I should do, and how to manage my own life. Mind your own business and your son's. The young man replied rather sharply, eliciting another wave of disapproval. It's up to you, Franco. But don't come to me later complaining that you have nothing left in your life. Basilio then got into his car, leaving the young man alone, hoping that he would understand something. Although it was clear that this was unlikely. That evening, Franco returned home but didn't find his father there. He decided to stay in the office, as he had done almost every day lately, wanting to feel as young, energetic, and involved in the business as before. Franco understood that he had disappointed his father, but he wasn't going to turn his life into an endless stream of problems that would have to be solved over and over again. Franco saw how much effort and time was spent on all these personal issues and didn't want to turn his life into something like that. His father allowed him to take charge only of the restaurant, while the rest of the business was put on autopilot. He had his manager, a responsible friend who wouldn't abandon him and would continue to pay dividends to his careless son. But the restaurant was Pablo's creation. He poured his heart into it, dreaming of turning it into a whole chain. He had the time and resources to finally realize his childhood dream. But as time passed, illness took its toll, and the man didn't have time to allow himself to become a successful restaurateur as he had dreamed. When Angelina called, Franco was sitting in the kitchen, sinking deeper into thoughts about his father and pondering how to satisfy them both. Angelina was crying, begging him to come, muttering something incoherent, but he didn't want to go. She was an adult woman, and if she had any problems, let her deal with them on her own. But when Angelina voiced the true reason for her distress, he had no choice. Franco threw his jacket into the car, got in himself, pushed the gas pedal, and sped off, leaving only the screeching of the car behind him. He arrived at the apartment much faster than he had anticipated, and now he was trembling, looking at his girlfriend. Her hands were shaking. She clenched the positive pregnancy test in those trembling hands. The thing he feared the most had happened, and thoughts of his father immediately took a back seat. "You took birth control pills." "Angelina, what the hell?" he exclaimed, looking at her incredulously, not believing what was happening. She continued to sob, feeling the fear welling up inside her. He quickly grabbed her hand, pulled her down, and sat her in the car. He was shaking too, and it seemed like he was even more scared than she was. On the way, Franco called a friend who was a doctor. Angelina was crying, almost not hearing the conversation. But when they finally stopped near the hospital, she was able to speak again, as if there hadn't been any hysteria just a few minutes ago. He didn't like these sudden changes, and for some reason, he felt something bad would happen. "Your father will let us get married now, sign the restaurant over so the child won't be left alone. Do you understand? You need to talk to him so he'll let me run the restaurant," she said through tears, still sobbing unbelievably. "Is that why you got pregnant?" The man shouted angrily, and she was staring at him, offended that he even began to doubt the validity of his accusations. They got out of the car, and Franco left her question unanswered. Despite Angelina insisting that he called his father, the young man didn't make any calls. By the time they reached the office, Angelina was extremely nervous, and all the suspicions buzzing in Franco's head began to make sense. He dragged her into the office, paying no attention to the people who stared at the strange couple. "Franco, out of respect for your father, I'll do it, but," the doctor began, quickly glancing at the young couple. And only now, apparently, did Angelina realize what awaited her. She backed off, but he grabbed her hand tightly, not letting her go. "Do the ultrasound. If she's pregnant, say so. If not, then," Franco paused, but his expression was not the most trustworthy. Angelina wanted to run away again, but he held onto her forearm even tighter. When the doctor helped her lie down on the examination table, performed the ultrasound, and confidently stated that she wasn't pregnant, everyone fell silent. It was so palpable that it made him feel nauseous. "So, you decided to do so, right? If you can't whine, then you decide to play games?" Franco asked, then stormed out of the room. "Franco! Wait, Franco!" she called after him, hastily buttoning up her low-rise jeans. She rushed out after him down the corridor. The doctor remained standing in his office, apparently relieved that he didn't have to witness the whole scene any longer. Angelina followed her chosen one, her hands and legs trembling, but there were no tears left. "Do you think the best way to talk to me is by berating me? Do you think I would blindly believe another lie you pass off as truth? I always knew you were rotten because of your thirst for money. But I never thought you'd resort to blackmailing with a non-existent pregnancy," Franco yelled, drawing the attention of everyone in the parking lot. Angelina looked around awkwardly. She certainly didn't want this situation to become public. "You don't understand any other way. How am I supposed to talk to you then? Do you think you've got everything? Why the hell are you yelling at me now? I just needed you to believe it, and then your father could have believed it too. Why do you care that I want to run the restaurant? Soon there will be nothing left of your father's business. He's getting weaker every day, and you don't even think about continuing his business. I would have just taken everything on myself, and that's it. You ruined everything." Angelina was already screaming in hysteria. But he didn't care, knowing he wouldn't get anything more from her if she started crying like that. Franco left her outside the hospital and drove away, deciding never to speak to her again. However, he knew that it was impossible. He would forgive her anyway, start seeking meetings with her himself, and then regret not leaving her when he had the chance. Meanwhile, Pablo, who had no idea about the tragedy unfolding in his son's life, was in his office. Juan Soto, the main competitor, was sitting next to him with a mournful face, repeating that illness could take away our loved ones. But Pablo understood that all these words were only meant to persuade him to sell the business. Pablo was already sure that the situation with his son would not change. Franco still wouldn't take responsibility. So, the restaurant was doomed. I'm offering you a good sum for the restaurant. It's falling apart already. You have no customers left and nothing to sell at a high price. Even though the acclaimed chef has left you, I might remind you, Juan said. And you want to buy a huge restaurant for the price of a newspaper stall? Pablo asked, feeling the hopelessness of his situation. Do you think anyone will pay you more? Listen, Pablo, I'm a reasonable person. I respect you as a businessman and as a former colleague. As someone who built a business in an incredibly difficult time. But see it for yourself, there's practically nothing left of your restaurant. So why not cut your losses? Juan asked. I've already told you that I'm not selling the restaurant. Let it die with me. At least until I change my mind, Pablo said quietly. 15 minutes later, he was sitting alone in his office, feeling tears choking him, making it hard to breathe. Thoughts were ringing in his head like a bell. He should not have been so stubborn and should have sold the business for a pittance while it could still be restored. Under a different name and with a different fate, his restaurant could have continued to thrive. But now, every day, it was turning into a concrete heap of glass and greenery that no one needed anymore. Pablo was sitting in his office, still contemplating selling the restaurant. Literally seconds before ending the conversation with his competitor, he had hoped to somehow agree with his son. Franco came home completely broken. He didn't tell his father anything, as he saw no point in it. The grown man already understood that another girl was not worth any attention. It would be better to stay away from her. One reason Franco didn't tell his father anything was the fear of being judged again for failing. As always, he was sitting in a tall chair next to his father, looking at him with a bewildered gaze, full of regret and sorrow. Do you get that I have only a few months left? I understand that when Dad is around and solves all the problems, the whole world seems not as harsh as it is. But as long as I'm alive, the man began, but his son immediately interrupted him. What are you going to tell me? As long as you're alive, should I take over all your business? Do I need to learn the skills so as not to end up with empty pockets? The young man countered with an annoyed voice, then simply waved away from his father, as if from a pesky fly bothering him on a hot day. Franco was already dealing with plenty of problems, and he had no desire to listen to his father moralize him. Don't you realize the huge mistake you're making? His father asked. Don't you realize I couldn't care less about your business? Franco replied in the same tone, tired of arguing with his father. An unpleasant sense of impending doom hung in the office. Franco sighed heavily, leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and just sat in complete silence, knowing that the conversation would continue. But they would never come to a consensus. Franco couldn't understand what his father was trying to achieve every time. Did he think that his adult son would obediently follow him like a child? Franco turned his head to his father, grimaced, and then said, I'm not going to work. Dad, I don't need your restaurant or your business. I don't need anything. I'll live off the money left after you, that's all. You worked so hard that I would work like crazy afterward? No, Dad, I want to enjoy life and not worry. I won't spend this life dealing with endless problems in your business, Franco said, then lifted his nose defiantly, unaware of how much he resembled his girlfriend at that moment, who would get offended like a child at the slightest provocation. Pablo looked at his son and became increasingly disappointed in him, realizing that he was to blame for raising such a child. Galena, dying with a plea to do everything for her son, surely never suspected that their wonderful son would grow into such a monster, not interested in anything. Pablo tried to convince his son one last time, but he remained indignant and adamant that he didn't need to work. Why is it so important to you that I engage in business? Why can't I just live for myself? Well, aren't you even happy to know that your child is just living and enjoying life? Do you need to know that I have a whole crowd of problems because of you? Well, great, Dad. Thanks. What else can I say to you? I'm sad that you won't be around. The illness is progressing, and you can't be the same as before. I would like you to continue with your affairs and visit Mom's grave, just to feel like a living person. But I can't change any of this, and I won't turn my life into one endless mourning either, Franco said. That was the last statement he made to his father. Then he left the office, leaving nothing but a bitter aftertaste for the unfortunate father, who was already devastated by grief. Pablo found himself alone in his office again, but now he no longer deluded himself with illusions. It was time to live out his last days with the understanding that his son would never change his mind. It was time to come to terms with the fact that soon he would lie in a hospital bed, someday close his eyes, and never see the light of day again, abandoning his beloved restaurant and the life he cherished so much. Pablo was completely crestfallen. The new tests he had to pick up at the hospital turned out to be worse than the previous ones. His son kept repeating that he had more than enough money that his father had earned. The restaurant had closed down and now presented a dismal sight, an unwanted place where once all the cream of the city gathered. Pablo was sitting in his car, deciding to come to the restaurant. He spent a few hours in this empty place. Bid farewell to the place that never became his dream. Pablo walked up to the restaurant, silently gazing at the luxurious facade, adorned the way he had always dreamed. Here it was, the embodiment of all his desires and aspirations. An unattainable dream that would remain so after his death. Until the very end, he hoped that his son would come to his senses and that they would manage to agree, although it was already unlikely. He approached closer, touched the cold metal handle with his palm, and suddenly heard a sob. "What's wrong, Milenio? Come on, don't cry," a woman said in a caring tone. Pablo leaned back slightly, peered around the corner, and suddenly saw a homeless woman sitting with a child in her arms. She immediately awkwardly jumped to her feet, clutching the child to herself as if preparing for the unknown man to lash out at her with reproaches. "Calm down. My name is Pablo," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Wanda," the girl replied, shaking, her eyes flashing with genuine horror at what was happening. She feared that it was a setup and that something was about to happen. He looked at her and realized that this girl had no chance of returning to a normal life. Franco should have looked at such people to witness firsthand what happens when nobody gives you a way to make big money. Wanda anxiously looked at the stranger, not knowing what to expect from him. Maybe it would be better for them to leave with the child altogether. "Can we sit here for a bit? The wind is very strong, and Milenio's ears just stopped feeling sick." "We can sit at this place without feeling the piercing wind," she said, then awkwardly smiled. "Come in. I'm serious." "Come in," Pablo said, swinging the restaurant doors wide open. Still glancing suspiciously at the benevolent benefactor, the young woman was even afraid to smile one more time. Who knew what he had in mind and what he wanted? But Wanda was so exhausted and so afraid for her son's condition that she was ready to do almost anything just for the baby to be a little warmer. "This is my restaurant," Pablo announced, then smiled sadly. "I wanted to turn this place into a dream, but illness decided otherwise. So, all this pile of aesthetic metal will remain to die." "Are you Pablo Arias?" she asked, and the man nodded. "I used to work at the local news desk." "I remember when you opened this restaurant," she said, frowning. She sat on a chair, the baby nestled in her arms, and almost instantly fell asleep, warmed by the merciless street wind. "That's how life goes. You work, you earn, and you turn your whole life into an endless race that ends anyway in a grave, like everyone else. You have a son, don't you?" "Sorry, I may be mistaken. It's been a while since they did a report about you," Wanda said as if shrinking in fear of displeasing the benefactor. "Yes, you are right, I have a son. But he couldn't care less about my business and restaurant. Only money and a lavish lifestyle interest him, nothing else. How I wish my son had inherited even a fraction of my ambitions. Everything would have been different. And now, as I approach death, I am forced to watch my life's work perish, drowning in endless fights with competitors who want to tear everything apart, like greedy vultures, the businessman said, sitting heavily on a chair. He raised his head, scrutinizing everything around him with a critical eye. Suddenly, he remembered sitting here for the first time, talking to his business partners, and asserting that he would turn this place into a beautiful restaurant where reservations would be made months in advance and where prominent figures would celebrate the most important events in their lives. Now the tables were covered with sheets, all chairs turned upside down, and nothing reminded him anymore of the prestigious place that once gathered the most famous people of the city. You know, stay in the restaurant. At least until I sell it. You can cook here, the fridges are still working. There's plenty of food piled up in the freezers. You can warm yourself in the kitchen if you turn on the stoves. So, for a while, at least, hang around until I'm alive, he said, looking at the tramp one last time, but not even bothering to answer the reasonable question, why did he do it for her? Pablo abandoned his restaurant. He was driving home, feeling tears welling up. He was ashamed that, as a grown man, he couldn't control his emotions. That night, he dreamed of his restaurant, a beautiful entrance, golden, magnificent lions guarding the doors on both sides. And there he was, the restaurant owner, a successful man, entering amidst applause. Pablo woke up with a heavy heart, feeling like crying. Like a child, he wanted to hide under the sheets, cover his head with a blanket, and cry, hoping that everything would somehow work out on its own while he pitted himself and dreamt of another life. When he walked into the kitchen, he saw his son, immersed in troubling thoughts that tormented him and didn't let him focus. Pablo hadn't seen his son in such a state for a long time, but he had no desire to inquire about what had happened in his life. "Haven't you sold the restaurant yet?" Franco asked, and the father shook his head negatively, deciding not to respond aloud, as it was too much of an honor. Franco immediately noticed the changes in his father, demonstratively ignoring them as if nothing had happened. He had been choosing his words for the conversation all morning and didn't want everything to be canceled just because he backed down in front of his father. "Angelina, and I thought maybe you should rewrite everything in her name after all." "And then what?" "Go ahead, write me a full list of girls you've slept with, and I'll gradually assign something to all of them. I worked my whole life to provide for your mistresses, didn't I?" The man asked, frowning, annoyed at his son for not understanding the basics. "What is wrong with you? Why do you care about who will take over the business when you're gone? I never thought you'd cling to this place until the bitter end, just to prevent Angelina from getting her hands on it. Angelina will squeeze everything out of you, then toss you aside like an unwanted bag of garbage, and that's it. I'm sorry you're a fool and don't understand that." The father snapped rudely. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Franco shouted, gripping the edge of the table. Emotions began to overflow him with renewed force, making him choke with anger that boiled somewhere in his chest. "I'll talk to you however I see fit. You won't receive the inheritance. You'll get a job as a salesman or pumping gas at a gas station for tips. And we'll see how Angelina treats you then," Pablo declared sharply. Franco hadn't expected to be blackmailed with money and still stared at his father, hoping he would apologize or at least try to reconcile with his son. But Pablo looked at him with the same destructive gaze, expressing nothing but anger and disappointment in his flesh and blood. The phone call that interrupted their conversation immediately became a new reason to get angry. Pablo put the phone down and continued to argue with his son. They dredged up new insults from the depths, showering each other with them. I was unable to find any good moments for reconciliation. When the argument was exhausted, the young man stormed out of the kitchen, leaving his father alone, throwing a few strong curses as a farewell, which seemed particularly vile considering the elderly man's condition. Pablo couldn't calm down after the argument with his son, even the next day. A week later, Franco came to his father, trying to make amends. He said that even relatives have arguments, and apparently, they were both going through the worst moments of life. But Pablo vividly remembered his son's words and now firmly believed that he shouldn't have left him anything, not even a percentage of the business. The phone call the next morning seemed inappropriate. Since the elderly man's condition worsened, most of his friends have disappeared. He had no idea who was calling him. Pablo picked up the phone. "Hello. I'm calling about your restaurant. I'm one of the most famous restaurateurs in the capital, but you've probably never heard of me. It's a narrow business," the voice on the other end said. Pablo, who was still preoccupied with his thoughts, didn't immediately realize what was being asked of him. "I propose to buy out your business. I'll leave the name and the concept to keep your business alive. I can't bear to see how a beautiful restaurant is turning to bare walls," the person said, further piquing Pablo's interest. The illness, stealing his final moments with each passing day, reminded him more strongly that the work of his life would remain stranded on the shore like a lifeless whale. It was necessary to sell everything as it was, even for pennies, to keep the business alive, albeit under different management. "Let's meet at the restaurant on Thursday. We'll talk and discuss everything. You'll review the contract, and then we'll make a decision. Don't worry, I'm well aware of your condition. I'm not going to pressure you. We just need some time to talk. All right?" Pablo was surprised by such agility. He concluded that someone was hopping onto the last car to snatch the restaurant for pennies, hoping that, relying on old memories, they could still restore the fragile reputation of the once famous establishment. Then the man remembered that he had a vagrant and a child in the restaurant. He needed to visit them and also inform them that their temporary shelter was coming to an end. Pablo approached the restaurant, again feeling the painful pang in his chest, reminding him of the times he used to visit this place when it was bustling with people, happy for the opportunity to secure a reservation even for just one evening in this wonderful little place. When he entered, he didn't notice how the woman surrounded him with care. She seated him at a table, presented him with beautifully plated food, and sprinkled it with seasonings. The vagrant had changed so much and looked happy, apparently because she and her son could at least temporarily be safe. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to leave soon. Most likely, the restaurant will be closed, so you'll have to leave. Don't apologize, you've already allowed me to live in a warm place. And in the meantime, my son has recovered from his constant colds. It's okay, there are things scarier in this life. We'll manage somehow with my son. We have a few more days, right?" she asked cheerfully. He couldn't understand how someone could be happy when they had absolutely nothing and nowhere to go. She had no close relatives, no roof over her head, nothing. Just empty and unjustified hope that someday things would get easier. "How delicious!" Pablo exclaimed when he finally tasted the food. "I've always dreamed of cooking in a professional kitchen. I wanted to become a chef, but at that time, my life was difficult. I had to give up my dream. In this life, if you don't have money, you can't count on any life favors," the young woman said with a guilty smile, briefly looked sad for a moment, and then smiled again. "Enjoy your meal, I hope you like it. What happened that you couldn't enter the college?" the man asked. He wanted to have a humane conversation with someone interested. His friend went abroad again, local acquaintances stopped communicating with him because of the illness, and his son amounted to nothing. So, he had to seize the moment to chat with a stranger. Wanda wasn't in a hurry to delve into the details. She spoke without going into details and avoided sharp corners. It was only then that Pablo realized that everything happening to her eloquently spoke of injustice. And how could you believe in justice in this life at all? There was a boy, born with a silver spoon, who aspired to nothing, and there was a girl who wanted to achieve a lot but remained with nothing due to constant problems. He desperately wanted to help her, but everything was already over. He didn't have much of his life left. My mother was a very rigid person. She firmly believed that a woman should get married no matter what, and that's the only way she could be happy. You know, all those sayings like "you're not a woman without a man" and "you can be happy only with children," and so on. I love my son very much, but marrying early to escape from my mother greatly ruined my life. That man morally disfigured me, and I never found the strength to properly recover and start over. Then the crisis hit, and my small business collapsed. I was left with a child in my arms on the street. Luckily, you let me live here for a while. At least we've recovered a little bit." She continued to talk, revealing more and more details. But the longer she spoke, the more the man's heart tightened as he understood how grateful ordinary people are for small things, unaware of big money. 2 days later, Ignacio Alvarez came to see the restaurant. He was in an expensive suit, all so presentable. The man knew a lot about the restaurant business, or at least he created an impression. Pablo listened to him but pretended not to be interested in selling. Despite the illness, the businessman remained a man who tried to gain profit. It was necessary to feign disinterest so that this pompous man wouldn't suddenly decide that the restaurant was his for a song. They didn't come to any conclusion, and Ignacio said he would call. They would discuss everything again and then decide when to meet to sign the contract and transfer the documents. But Pablo didn't even suspect at that time that they wouldn't sign any documents. He suddenly saw the vagrant peering out from the kitchen, and she looked at him alarmed. Although Pablo didn't know this woman, he had never seen her so frightened. "Pablo, don't believe him. He's my ex-husband," she blurted out in one breath, still not believing her own eyes. Pablo, who had heard about this man, frowned heavily and couldn't believe that he was somehow connected to the restaurant business. "Listen, I know it sounds at least strange, but I don't have any reasons to deceive you. He's broke, lost everything on bets, and has nothing. He was simply bought, and that's it. He has no money to pay for the restaurant. Please don't make a mistake, don't trust him," she said through tears. Wanda suddenly burst into tears, trying to calm down, although it was impossible. Memories from the past engulfed her, making her regret more and more. He lost everything. He started gambling and forgot he had a family. "I got into huge debts, which I had to pay off to the last penny so that they wouldn't torture us somewhere in the forest. But he didn't care. He found another girl, lived with her carelessly and easily, and forgot about us. You can't trust such a person, please understand. Try to find out something about him, you'll understand. I'm not lying to you." He already believed that the girl wasn't lying to him. There was too much pain in her words. He felt the overwhelming disappointment that grew stronger with every sob. That same evening, he rented an apartment for her, paid in advance for a year according to the contract, and promised to help her find a job. She cried and thanked him. Even in the best-case scenario, Wanda couldn't have expected a barely familiar person to help her. Pablo returned home. The first thing he did was call his old acquaintance and relay all the information about the man who showed up pretending to be a fancy restaurateur from the capital. The man didn't expect a response to come so soon. There was something repulsive about this person, who strutted around his restaurant as if he were some important figure. A few days later, Pablo ended up in the hospital with another bout. His son demonstratively didn't come to see him. He said he wouldn't visit him at all until he found out what, after all, he would inherit. Pablo decided that if he was of no use to his son without money, then he was equally unnecessary with it. He didn't bother to rewrite the will, silently lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for that same girl, whom he took in at his restaurant, to come to him and bring something tasty. She entered his room like a relative, as if she were his daughter, and he awaited her like a close person who only cared about his well-being. One day, Wanda walked in with that same acquaintance who had to find out everything. This acquaintance quickly confirmed everything Wanda said. Indeed, this was an untrustworthy man who was dressed up like a doll and thrown into the fray to avoid getting caught if the truth surfaced. Competitors sent the disguised restaurateur to buy the business and ultimately destroy it. When Pablo learned about this, he tore up the deal and decided that he'd rather let the restaurant fall on its own than be oppressed by negligent competitors, for whom fair competition was like nothing. Wanda was sitting by Pablo's bedside. He breathed heavily but smiled, looking at her. "You did great. You spotted him right away. Don't worry, girl, your day will come. How's your son?" "Thanks for your prayers," Pablo, Wanda said with a smile, removing the bandage from his forehead and replacing it with a fresh, cool one. He finally got into kindergarten. Now he spends time with other kids, and I have a chance to look for work. I go to interviews, but employers back off when they find out I have a child. It's like the government wants everyone to have kids, but then you can't find a job. Wanda immediately grew somber but forced herself to smile because she believed that despair never leads to anything good. When Pablo was left alone in the room, he deeply pondered that perhaps Wanda was the only person he could trust with his restaurant. When he was discharged from the hospital a few days later, he invited her to meet again at the restaurant, where they would have dinner and talk. Wanda readily agreed, especially since she always enjoyed cooking something tasty and delighting the person who had given her a wonderful chance in life. If it weren't for Pablo, she would still be wandering the streets until social services took away her child, and she would have withered away completely, left alone with her problems without the possibility of receiving moral and financial support. Wanda cooked amazingly delicious meat that melted in the mouth, leaving a pleasant citrus aftertaste and hints of herbs that tantalized the taste buds. Listen, I know you wanted to own your restaurant, but things didn't work out for you. I've thought long and hard about what happened in the past few days, and I've decided to completely sign the restaurant over to you, Pablo said. For a moment, Wanda heard him but didn't take his words seriously. She thought it was a harmless joke. But when Pablo repeated what he said, she just stared at him in disbelief. Just because she fed him? Because she visited him in the hospital? Wanda suddenly started stuttering and staring at him, but then covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Pablo silently waited for her to calm down so they could finally finish their conversation. You're an excellent cook. You can create your own menu. As long as I'm alive, I'll give you a good manager to help you acquire all the necessary skills. Then you'll manage on your own. And if you have the strength, you'll open a whole chain of restaurants. That's what I dreamed of, Pablo said. He took her trembling hands in his and hoped that his touch would calm her down a little. Wanda, please listen to me. You're a wonderful person, kind and caring. You've just had some bad luck in life, and now I want to set things right. You don't need to look for a job anymore, just gather your team. And as long as I'm alive, I'll help you, he said. Wanda wanted to refuse the offer because she felt she wasn't worthy of it. But as soon as she realized that she wouldn't get another chance like this in this life, she actively nodded her head, now afraid that he would change his mind at any moment. The next day, Wanda began sorting through candidates, conducting interviews with great enthusiasm, and evaluating the culinary skills of potential employees. Wanda herself was an excellent cook. She wanted this restaurant not just to continue existing, but to get a second wind, as Pablo had dreamed. Even when the man ended up back in the hospital, he wasn't as worried because he saw his establishment flourishing day by day. As soon as the opportunity arose, Pablo came to the restaurant himself, where he was greeted with applause. He enjoyed the wonderful atmosphere in the packed room and thought only of how Wanda, whom he met by the will of fate, was ensuring the business continued while she got a chance at life for herself and her child. After the restaurant closed, Pablo sat at the bar counter on a high wooden stool. Wanda was standing before him, laughing and telling him about how she had the best team. And anyway, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Wanda fulfilled his dying wish and breathed new life into the establishment. Social media posts, reviews, and enthusiastic feedback started flooding in, praising not only the luxurious restaurant service but also the amazing food that had no equal. There were crowds of people, while competitors lost one establishment after another. The former head chef ran back, but no one was waiting for him here anymore. By that point, Pablo hadn't left anything to his son. He had transferred everything to the girl, seeing that she had a much better chance of managing the funds he had earned by working hard. Oh, Wanda! I'm amazed. You're so small and fragile, yet you manage such a business with ease, Pablo said. But do we have a choice, Pablo? It's either holding onto the business or languishing in poverty with a child in arms. In this life, you have to be able to maneuver. And if an opportunity presents itself, you have to seize it with both hands. Wanda laughed, once again presenting herself to him as a strong person who wasn't afraid of challenges and responsibilities. He enjoyed her boldness and her confidence in her abilities. For days after the grand award ceremony for the restaurant, Pablo was admitted to the hospital for good. Wanda came to say goodbye to him because they both knew this would be their last meeting. Once again, he said some parting words and then asked to leave him alone. The next morning, Pablo was gone, and news of his passing spread throughout the city. People came to the restaurant in droves to honor his memory. They raised their glasses again and again to the man who, through sheer willpower, had seen his dream through to the end. Franco didn't even come to the funeral, demonstratively ignoring his father's death because he wasn't going to forgive him for the lack of money. Franco held out hope until the last moment that his father had just scared him. He would receive the money later, when the will was read. But months passed, there were no wills, and all hope of getting something from his father disappeared. Franco was left only with the apartment his father had bought him several years ago. Along with a sense of betrayal, he had missed the only chance in this life to live carefree, or, as he put it, without worries. Friends advised Franco to talk to the girl to whom his father had left everything. Negotiate certain terms with her. But Franco considered himself too stubborn and flatly refused to negotiate. Either you sort out the money issue with her yourself or I'll talk to her, Angelina snapped rudely during their latest conversation. By that point, Franco had lost all desire to argue with his girlfriend, who was becoming increasingly nervous with each passing day, causing him a lot of inconvenience. Unfortunately, Angelina always chose topics he didn't want to discuss. His father had passed away 6 months ago, but he had left behind a bitter taste, like someone who had left his son with nothing. On the other hand, when Franco looked back at their relationship, it was obvious that his father couldn't have done otherwise. If Franco could turn back time, he would do everything to run his father's business. Then he would have hired managers, lived to his heart's content, and forgotten about the problems that now seemed paramount. If you don't fix the money issue, I'll break up with you. Do you hear me? Angelina said in an annoyed tone, glaring at her boyfriend angrily. They parted ways for several months, but the girl returned to him again, apparently deciding that she hadn't gotten everything she wanted from the young man. Franco knew that during their separation, Angelina had tried to date another wealthy boy, but he quickly rejected her when he realized she was only after money. Franco understood that forgiving her was a foolish idea. But since he had forgiven her, all that was left was to endure. If you want to break up, let's do it. I'm not going to live like this, the man said, causing his girlfriend's indignation. Unlike you, I at least tried to please your father. And you ruined everything. I could have had a restaurant now, and you could have lived off your father's money. Wouldn't that have been a good outcome? Look at me, Franco. Would it have been bad? Angelina was starting to get hysterical, which meant the conversation was about to end. It would end in tears and mutual accusations. Recently, they hadn't been able to communicate any other way. Franco looked up at Angelina. Suddenly, he remembered how she had tried to blackmail him with a non-existent pregnancy. He pushed her phone away, which she had placed nearby. You know what, Angelina? Go back to Valerio, or whatever his name is. And leave me alone, he said calmly. Angelina's eyebrows slowly rose, and she stared at him with genuine surprise. He had never dumped her before. She had always been the one to initiate things, keeping the initiative firmly in her hands. If you think you can scare me with that, Angelina began, but he interrupted her. Angelina, I behaved abominably towards my father, and I fully understand that. Life has taught me a lesson, and I've learned it. But I'm not going to make such mistakes again. And one of the biggest mistakes in my life has always been you. With your royal air and endless thirst for money, I'm no better, but if I had a different girlfriend, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way with my father. How dare you accuse me like that? Angelina exclaimed in disbelief, stunned by such straightforwardness. She hated being accused, and now she was being attacked directly, with no concern for her feelings. Franco stood up and walked to the door of the apartment, now completely sure that he would never be here again. If you leave now, I guarantee you'll never come here again. I'll find myself a decent man, and you'll have to watch my photos on social media, drooling and kicking yourself. Got it? Franco ignored her threats, nodded, waved goodbye as if to an old classmate, and then left the building. Franco descended to his car, got behind the wheel, and drove to his father's restaurant. It was time to change everything while he still had the courage. Franco waited for Wanda to become available because he wanted to talk to her. At the beginning of their relationship, when he first found out that she had inherited everything, he took advantage of her. But now, Franco wanted to reconcile and ask for just one chance to get back on his feet in life. Wanda easily accepted him. She held no grudge against the young man, who was barely a couple of years older than her. I came to apologize and ask for help. Take me on as your administrator. I'll even take courses if necessary. I can start as a waiter if needed. I understand how terribly I treated my father. He fell silent and looked at his open palms, feeling like a complete fool, humiliating himself in front of the woman who had taken on all the responsibility for his father's business. Your dad didn't leave you with nothing, he just wanted to teach you a lesson. You have bank accounts and money, you just can't use them, Wanda suddenly said. Franco stared at her with bewildered eyes. Your father knew that sooner or later you would realize the value of his efforts. That's why he decided to give you access to the money only when you understood its true worth. You need to get a job, start your own business, and somehow start earning a good income. Then your father's lawyer will gradually start opening your accounts. He loved you very much, Franco. He just missed you terribly. When Wanda finished speaking, Franco couldn't hold back any longer. Tears welled up, and a sense of self-blame grew in his chest for all the time he had blamed his father when he should have been looking at himself and his behavior. He had been crying until he finally calmed down, regained his composure, and was ready to talk. In the end, Franco didn't go to work for Wanda. He turned to his father's old friend, began learning the business from him, and delved deeper into his father's affairs. It was hard, but at the same time interesting and even fun. Now Franco wasn't doing this just to get more money and live a carefree life. He was doing it to pay his last respects to his father, whom he had treated so terribly in the last months of his life.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.